Will sitzen Ente? Will sitzen da? Okay.
Good Yontiv, Bruchim Aboyim, Hey Davis verbringen a Hakel of Nashi Mונטריאול and the Yeshivas, the Bochrim, Bruchim Aboyim. Like someone told me today that the Rebbe was smart, that every 7 years he made sure that all the moistas come together. Every 7 years you have to make sure everything comes together, a hakel. So Tavshin Ches, which was also a hakel here, Hey Davis, Shabbos Parshas Vayigash, the Rebbe spoke about the connection between Hey Davis and Shnas Hakel, how the union of Hey Davis is the Yom Tov HaSfarim, the union of learning from the Sfarim, Nitzochen HaSfarim, and so too the union of Hakel is to Leman Yishnu, Leman Yilmedu, right? That the people should learn Torah, should open up the Sfarim, Nitzochen HaSfarim. That's the whole union of Shnas Hakel, the union of Hey Davis. And at the same time, whenever there's an union in Torah, it's also negea to the Zulas. It's not only negea li'atzmoi. So the union of Hakel is an union which is negea to the Zulas dafka. There's the Makil and the Nikol, right? The one who's Makil, the one who's gathering, and the one who's being gathered and being taught. That there's a connection between the giver and the receiver, and that's also the union of Hey Davis, which is the union of Tzachon HaSfarim, the union of Limud HaTorah, which is not only for yourself, it's also about helping someone else in the learning of Torah. So we will begin the program by saying the Kapitel of Tilim of the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin. We would like to invite Rabbi Moshe Nu, the Shliach, the Rav in MTC, Mונטריאול Torah Center, to say both Kapitels. Yeah. We would like to ask everyone to stand.
Recording in progress.
Shila Mala Ises, Ela Harima Yain Yoriezri. Ezemi Adino, Eise Shamayim Vaodes. Yitena Mitraglach, Hayon Mushimracha. Hine Layon Vela Yishon Shem Israel. Dino Shimracha, Nitil Hajaji Minacha. Yema Mashem Shliakeko, Yorech Baloila. Az nishmor chamikol ra yishmoyes nafshecha Tino yishmor tzischa v'yecha meyata v'yada elam Shir Amal is the David Tzemachti Beimri Muli Beis Adinoi Neilech Oyim Beis Hoyi Ragleinu V'sharayich Yerushalayim Yerushalayim Hadinoi Yaki Yirshich Ubralay Achtav Sheshom all the Shvatim Shifti, your Eidos of Israel, the Heidos of Shem Adinoi. Kishol Mayosh Kisis, the Mishpat Kisis, the Beis David. Shal Shlem Yerushalayim, Mishloy Havoyich. Yishol Ibachel, Shal Bam Misoyich. The man Achai Bereg, Adab Lasholim Moch. The man Beis Adinoi Alehem, no Avak Shotev Loch.
Boczki, בבקשה. אתה רוצה לעשות את הוידאו ראשון או לפי הסדר?
Okay, l'chaim. Everyone has the mashke bottles on the table. Everyone can say l'chaim. You can ask your chaver to pour you, or you could help someone else to say l'chaim. L'chaim l'ivroch. will begin the Farbringen now with a few words, Dvar Malchus, Divrei Torah, from our Rav, Rabbi Beryl Bell, Harav Beryl Bell, the Rav of Kehilas Lubavitch, Beis Medrash Lubavitch, and the Chaver in the Beis Din of Montreal.
Chaim. And a good yom it's Mitzvah Tevis, but still it's Hamshach Tevis. So the Masiba is connected, as we heard before, with both Shnas Hakil and also Tevis. Just wanted to bring some Eidos. In the days of Tevis, I was living then in Crown Heights. And there's a few things I saw that I didn't see too much written up. Maybe I didn't read everything, but some things that I saw that I thought would be appropriate for the occasion. It was one day, one of the days that I was able, there were different stories about who was allowed to go to court on which day. And one of the days that I was able to go was the day that they read the Rebbetzin's deposition in court. It's known that when there's edus, in a court, when there's testimony, so there's a court reporter that writes into the record all of the testimony and what the lawyers ask and what the person answered, what the witness answered. And sometimes there's an objection. A person says something that's not admissible as evidence, so they make an objection, so the objection is sustained. You kabul your objection, it doesn't get written into the record, or the objection is denied, whatever the case, and then it's written into the record. With the deposition, what the Rebbetzin did, she didn't come to court. They brought the court to the Rebbetzin, and she gave the lawyers were there on President Street, in the house, and she gave her testimony there, and then it's read into the court. And it's known that this was an extremely painful experience, both for the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin, and the personal nature of the questions that she was being asked, you could tell, was just excruciating. It was just being read into the record by one of the lawyers, I think. So one of the other people was just reading it there, because it was also, came out, and now they printed the Lange Farbringen from the COVID Kinus HaShulchan with the week-long Farbringen. So the Rabbi Krinsky spoke about that deposition, and that hoping that her sister wouldn't come, which her sister did come there, and there was no way legally that they could tell her to leave. She would have the right to be present. And the lawyers were asking all of these personal questions. How many times do you speak on the phone? What do you speak about? It was just extremely difficult to reading all this. And then it came a certain point in the reading of the deposition into the record, and then the lawyer for the other side said, objection. I know it's unusual to make an objection before the statement is read, but if you read the statement in the courtroom, there will be chaos. We were sitting over there in the courtroom. Nobody knew what it said. So he wanted it not to be read in the courtroom. So he said, I'm objecting to the next statement. It shouldn't be in the record, and it's not a legal statement, and it shouldn't be read in the courtroom. There'll be chaos in the courtroom. And the judge said, it's okay, I read it already, and you're right, it's not a legal statement, and it's not going to go into the record. You're right, but I read it, and it's a most remarkable statement. That was the statement of the judge, and nobody knew. At least, I guess there were people that read the deposition, but the people in the crowd, nobody knew what it was that was stricken from the record. They argued later, should be stricken, not be stricken, whatever the case is. It turns out, in the time later on, that when the Rebbetzin said, they asked, how did the Svarim belong to your father or to the Chassidim? And the Rebbetzin said, my father himself belonged to the Chassidim. Which is not a legal statement. You know, people don't belong to other people. You know, they did away in the United States with the Civil War. They did away with slavery, so we don't have a concept that people belong to other people. It's not a legal concept of ownership. So it was struck from the record, but that Rebbe said later on was what really made the transformation in terms of the Didan Natzach to bring it down to Peil Mamish. Before this Mishpat, I had a friend that was in law, and I just asked him out of curiosity, you know, in federal law, you know, in the federal court system, you have to go by precedent. There are other cases. Are there any other cases? Anything like this ever happened? So the guy came back to me a few days later. He says, yeah, there's a whole list of cases. Give me a list of cases. And every single case was a question of whether a religious leader, his possessions were his personal possessions and they have the status of personal property, or does it have the status of belonging to the organization, to the religious organization. There was a whole list of cases over there. Every single last case, the judgment was it belonged to the person as a yochid. It belonged to the individual. Every single last case. Okay, so obviously I didn't tell anybody. I said, okay, good, the Didan Natzach will be even bigger. But that was the job of this Goyish judge, to find not only what's the emes, but find a way to be malbishit in Asius that it should be legally acceptable in secular law. And precedent, he didn't have what to go by. And that's why, I knocked him with a maisa, sort of from Shlomo Majeski, the maisa. He once had the conversation with an Israeli who was trying to get into the Air Force. And when he was practicing flying, so just like when you're learning taking your driver's test, there's somebody in the seat behind you that has the emergency brake, you know, in case you do something wrong. So they have the same thing in these fighter jets. And as he was training, so he was going to go through a certain maneuver, and the trainer told him that you're going to reach a certain point, and we're going to do a certain maneuver, and you're going to feel like you're going to crash, that everything's going straight down. And your reaction is going to be to pull it out of its dive. He says, but the body is misleading you. You have to look at the instruments. Look at the instrument panel, and whatever you do, don't rely on your feelings, rely on what it says on the instrument panel. So, he goes up the plane, he does this maneuver, that maneuver, then it comes to this maneuver, and he feels that the plane's going to crash. So he pulls out, so that's it. End of the session, the trainer took over, we're landing now, and you're not for the Air Force. So he ended up in the Army, he's ended up in another branch of the Tzahal, but he was not made for the Air Force. And that's throughout the Mishpat HaSforim, and B'chlal throughout the Nesias, things that to us don't necessarily make any sense, but doesn't matter. When they asked about using the letter from Professor Marx, and the Rebbe told him that they should base themselves on this letter. So it was something which they were evidently not considering using at all, because they thought it would be very flimsy evidence and would be overturned, not taken into account. Whereas it turns out that letter was the mechanism that the judge used to be malbish this entire mishpat in secular law, and it was bulletproof. It survived 2 appeals, all the way up to the Supreme Court. But even though in Seichel Anushi it didn't make too much sense to the lawyers, but that's it. They had to find a way to have it make sense in Seichel Anushi. And if I'm not mistaken, that the argument that the judge gave in order to explain how it was communal property, I don't even think our lawyers presented. I think that he did it himself. In other words, he came out, all the evidence was pointing it was a personal possession. And like I said with the precedents, and it turns out that according to the judge's decision, it was taken. But then with this letter, he transferred possession over to Aguch. So before that, it was take his. But with this letter, he transferred it to Aguch. So that letter was the whole basis of the entire Mishpat, and the entire Didan Natzach came out of something that to our Fleish to Eigen is something which is built in movement. So what does this have to do with Hakil? What Heitevis has to do, what does it have to do with Hakil? So I have to tell you, this is, I'm sure everybody heard the story with Adam Lazer Agodl. If you didn't, even if you did, you hear it another time, it's given the Seder, it's a geweldige Meise, Adam Lazer Agodl over Shalom. When he was in the Shnas Hakel Mem Ches, he was coming back after Tishrei, And he was exhausted. He was verbringing and Simchas Torah, and he had to run around and buy different things before he went back to Eretz Yisrael. And he finally gets on the plane, and he's ready to fall asleep. He's crashed. He didn't sleep for who knows how long, and he's going to fall asleep on the plane. Finally, and Bachal, he was feeling like very, very unsteady with himself. Like Hakel, I have to do Hakel. Well, what do you mean I have to do Hakel? Like, he's anyway getting together with people, like, what makes it a hakil? Like, what exactly are you supposed to do? See, he wasn't sure. See, it's not like you have to sign up children for a Sefer Torah. You know exactly what to do. But here it was amorphous. It wasn't so firmly defined what it is he was supposed to do. And he was exhausted. He said, he'll get home. We'll figure out what to do. Meanwhile, he's on the plane full of Yidden. And he says, oh, how can I do it? I mean, I have to do hakil. Every single moment you have to do hakil. You have to be a hakil yid. If you're not blowing your chatzetzes, you say, maybe you're not a kain, you're not blowing chatzetzes, you're a chassid, and it's a shnas hakil, and you're not koching in hakil. So what's going on with you? So you really have to do something in hakil. So he's exhausted, he's on the plane. What is he going to do? So he figured like this. I'll ask the head, the stewardess, whoever's in charge over there, that can I make an announcement in the plane? And that'll be mine, then I'll talk about Hakil. They'll probably say no, everybody wants to sleep over there on the plane. So I'll ask, and they'll say no, and I'll be able to go back to sleep. And I did my part. I did something to try to do Hakil, and the trumpet didn't blow so loud, but I tried what I could do. So he asked the head steward. So the guy says, well, not right now, we're serving, but I think in another 3 minutes it'll be okay. So what do I do now? Now I put myself in the position, and he wasn't prepared. He starts writing on a napkin, he can't put his thoughts together, he's exhausted. Anyway, he got up and he's coming from the